Hello and welcome back to the channel. I haven't recorded anything for quite some time, a few months, because I had a time sensitive project. So now that I've completed that project, excuse me, so now that I've completed that project, I will fulfill a promise. And the promise that I made was that after I did the entire book of Daniel, I stated that there's a hidden prophecy in Daniel, and I'll come back to it. So this is me coming back to it. So there is a hidden prophecy in Daniel. It's actually all over the Bible. But today we look at that hidden prophecy, that's in two places. It's in a few more, but it's most prevalent in these two places, or most obvious, I should say. All right, so with that, let's look at the hidden prophecy in Daniel. So, Daniel chapter 5, and reading from verse 1. And you should remember this. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple. The house of the Lord in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver and bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Immediately, the fingers of a hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, his bowels gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." All right, when we did Daniel chapter 5, we saw why this person would be the third ruler of the kingdom. All right, because Belshazzar wasn't actually king, he was a king regent. All right, the king was Nabonidus, but Nabonidus was gone for a long time, about a decade at least. And Belshazzar was running the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. So, we remember the story, all right? Belshazzar's mother eventually told him about this old man, this man who is now very old, named Daniel, who served Nebuchadnezzar very well. And he called Daniel for Daniel to interpret the handwriting on the wall. Let's continue. And jumping down to verse 24. At this point, Daniel came in and said, "All right, I'll interpret it. I don't want any of your gold. I don't want anything you promise, but I'll interpret it. All right? I don't essentially like how you're running things, but I will interpret it." All right, so from verse 24, all right, this is Daniel speaking, all right, essentially upbraiding the king. All right, so then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. If you read a different version, like the King James, it'll say Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Upharsin just means and Parsin. This is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end, because Mene means numbered. Tekel, right? Or shekel. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez. Perez is plural form of person. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So Daniel gave the interpretation. But in the Bible, as we've seen in numerous places, all right, one of them is Jesus at the Olivet Discourse when they were asking, when his core disciples, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, all right, came to Jesus and say, what will be the signs of the end? What should we look for? And Jesus told them a whole bunch of things, and I will do a video on the Olivet Discourse. And one of the things he told them is when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. Now, we cover that and we know that the abomination of desolation involved Antiochus Epiphanes a few hundred years before Jesus. So we know that was a dual prophecy. Well, the Bible is full of them. This is another dual prophecy. All right? And what Daniel has done is he has interpreted this prophecy, but he's interpreted using the meaning of the words. So mini means numbered, tekel means weighed, and Perez means divided. But if you'll notice, the warning, the prophecy is mini tekel upharsin. You notice Daniel didn't say anything about the fact that mini was used twice. Why was mini used twice? Does God stutter? Daniel gave one interpretation, but there's a second. You see, these words mean something, but they're also units of measure. So like if this prophecy happened today, if someone came and wrote on the wall today in one of our Western countries, it may be something like quarter, 10 cent, 5 cent, dollar. All right, it's units of measure. All right, now when you use the units of measure, this prophecy reads a wholly, completely different way. And that different way is not for Belshazzar in those days, but it's for our days. So let's look at when you read this prophecy differently. So, mini means 1,000. All right? It's a unit of 1,000. Tekel, and to this day, there's the shekel. Tekel is related to the shekel. The shekel, if you're in Israel, is their currency. Tekel is 500, and Perez or parson is 20. So when you add up mini, tekel, and parson, you get 2,520. What does 2,520 mean? We'll get into that, but first, let's get into, I stated that this particular prophecy is hidden, and it's all throughout the Bible. And today we look at two of the places where it's most obvious. Let's look at the second place it's most obvious, in the book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel chapter 4, reading from verse 1. All right, now Ezekiel is walking around prophesying to the people of Israel about their behavior and the fact because Israel was apostate. By this time, Israel had split into two nations, the kingdom of Israel in the north, the kingdom of Judah in the south. The kingdom of Israel in the north was always apostate. From the beginning, they started worshipping idols and doing the things that Yahweh said, don't do. Those were the guys in the north, the kingdom of Israel. The kingdom of Judah in the south, there was sometimes that there were kings who decided to chase after God or try to put things right. But for most of the time, especially coming down to the end, they were very apostate. They were doing what Yahweh said he hated. They were doing what their neighbors did. They sacrificed children. They worshipped other gods. All this nonsense. And Ezekiel kept warning them. So from verse 4, Yahweh is speaking to Ezekiel. And you, son of man, take a brick and lay it before you, and engrave on it a city, even Jerusalem. So he's telling Ezekiel, take a brick and make a model of Jerusalem, and put siege works against it, and build a siege wall against it, and cast up a mound against it. Set camps also against it, and plant battering rams against it all around. And you take an iron girdle and place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and set your face towards it, and let it be in a state of siege, and press the siege against it. This is a sign for the house of Israel. So he's saying, you know what? Act out this prophecy for me. Not all prophecies are spoken, some are acted out. Act out this prophecy for me, that I will come against, I will cause, because of disobedience, I will cause, excuse me. Okay, sorry, I just had a delivery. Okay, so this is Yahweh, all right, prophesying through an acted out prophecy that he is going to punish the nations of Israel and of Judah because of their apostasy. Is Yahweh evil? No. They have an agreement, they have a covenant, they have a contract. And that contract is, you get good things happen to you if you do X, you get punished if you do Y. And they, for hundreds of years, did Y. All right? They sacrificed their children. They were very evil in all that they did. They were evil to themselves, etc. They essentially broke the contract and continually did so. All right? And everything Yahweh does, it's to bring us to a point of salvation. And when I say us, I mean us in total. Sometimes your parents or your forebears are insistent on doing the wrong things that will destroy themselves. Okay, Yahweh will deal with them. So, okay, they destroy themselves, but hopefully those that come after them will see the example of what happened to their parents and wouldn't do the same, so they wouldn't be destroyed. Because Yahweh, he's interested in you, but he's also interested in the whole. But let's continue. All right? And from verse 4, then lie on your left side and place the punishment of the house of Israel upon it. For the number of days that you lie on it, you shall bear their punishment. For I assign to you a number of days, 390 days, equal to the number of years of their punishment. All right, so Yahweh is telling Ezekiel, I am going to make an acted out prophecy. All right, you essentially, it's much bigger than this one I'm showing you, right? But essentially, I am going to act out a prophecy, including how you eat, how you cook your food, etc. But this part, lie on one side, X amount of days for Israel, and on the other side, X amount of days for Judah. But let's continue. And for every day that you lie on this side, it shall be a year of punishment. Right? For I assign you a number of days, 390 days, equal to the number of years for the punishment. So long shall you bear the punishment of the house of Israel. And when you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the punishment of the house of Judah. 40 days I assigned you, a day for each year. And you shall set your face towards the siege of Jerusalem with your arm bared, and you shall prophesy against the city. And behold, I will place cords upon you, so that you cannot turn from one side to the other, till you have completed the days of your siege. Okay? So, I remember I told you there's a hidden prophecy. So let's look at it. Let's dig a bit deeper into it. All right? Israel and Judah have rebelled constantly over years and years and years and years and years. Right? Hundreds of years they've rebelled. So God spoke to them, they would not listen, so it was time for punishment. All right? There's an old saying, if children don't hear, they'll feel. And the reason for punishment is not because you're wicked. The reason for punishment is to change behavior so that your life will be better in the years to come. That's the reason we punish children. In fact, the reason the world is all crazy with young people doing all manner of things is because for decades we've been told that punishing children is wicked. But the Bible says, he who does not punish his child is being wicked to that child. Right? He who doesn't, discipline his child hates that child, because in years, in the future, that child is going to suffer, because humans are very addictive and bad behavior is addictive. So if you don't discipline out the bad behavior when they're young, or at least try to, they are going to do the same thing as adults, and they're going to suffer for it. All right? They're going to suffer for it. It's going to be painful towards them. But let's continue. So, 390 days. All right? So there's 390 days. That's the punishment for the kingdom of Israel. And let's add to that 40 days. That's the punishment for the kingdom of Judah. So all told, that comes up to 430 days. Now 430 days, let's minus 70. Why 70? 70 was the years of exile into Babylon. Where do I get the 70 from? We'll look at that. But 470 days minus 430 days minus 70, that's 360 days. Let's look and see where I got the 70 from. Now I got the 70 from a couple places, right? But let me bring out the most obvious one. Jeremiah was known as the weeping prophet. He went around Judah, trying to get the people to change their behavior, always crying, always weeping. He was locked up. They tortured him a bit. All right, they, did some stuff to him, but he went about his mission, trying to get them to change. It didn't. So, in Jeremiah 25, let's read from verse 8. Therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, thus says Yahweh Sabaoth, because you have not obeyed my words, behold, I will send for all the tribes of the north. We always see Israel being attacked from the north. Huh? I will send for all the tribes of the north, declares the Lord, and for Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And I will bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all these surrounding nations. I will devote them to destruction. That word devote to destruction, that word is karam. Some place it means dedicated, but it's dedicated to the destruction. All right, I will devote them to destruction and make them a horror, a hissing, and an everlasting desolation. Moreover, I will banish from them the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the grinding of the millstone and the lamp and the light of the lamp. In other words, I'm going to destroy their civilization. Everything that makes them civilized, everything that you take for granted, everything you love, you have been terrible. You've been apostate. So there are terrible, there are horrible things coming. And from verse 11, this whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. That's where I get the 70 years. Let's go a little further down in Jeremiah. And Jeremiah chapter 29 and from verse 10. Thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, You see, in that 70 years, all those people who decided to be apostate and wouldn't change, they would have died out in Babylon. And their children will watch, and who would have grown up seeing the hardship will decide, we're not going to do that anymore. And the proof is in the pudding. Prior to the exile, Israel and Judah worshipped all manner of gods. In fact, they even gave Yahweh a wife, which is why there are some people who are talking all kind of foolishness. Yahweh originally had a wife. Yeah, they gave him one because they took this deity called Asherah. Otherwise, that deity is named all manner of things because paganism moves from country to country, from people to people. So Asherah, who you'll see in the Bible as Ashtaroth, which means, when you see the Oroth thing, it means that they're not using the name, but it's like a curse. All right, she's called Ashtaroth in the Bible. She's also related to Isis, and in a different country, right, in Persia, etc., and as well as in Europe, she's also called by the name of, she's also called, I think it's Ishtar in Babylon, but I know that she's also called Easter. Right? They gave Yahweh that person that says, all right, Yahweh is the man, or is the king, and Asherah is the queen. So they worship the queen of heaven. But you notice after, and that's why in Israel you find these thousands of figurines of Yahweh and Asherah put together. And they worshipped all manner of other gods. And when things happen, like when there was war, when there was famine, or the crops didn't grow well, they'll sacrifice the children to other gods. And they worship Baal, or the Baals. When you see in the Bible it says they worship the Baals, it just means they worship the whole host of pagan gods. Do you see that after the exile? No. But unfortunately, after the exile, they did something just as bad, if not worse. But anyway, all right. So the punishment works. All right, that punishment works. They dropped apostasy completely. But how did that go on? Let's look. So from Jeremiah 29:10, for thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, in other words, when the 70 years of exile are completed for Babylon, I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. I know as modern day Christians, we take this internally, for I know the plans that I have for you. And we can, because Yahweh has plans for each and every one of us. But Yahweh has plans for the collective. Does that cancel out each other? No. Yahweh is big enough to have plans for the collective as well as plans for you. All right, so this is where we get the 70 years from. Let's proceed. So we have 360 years and we have 2520 years, right? 2520. What's the relation? I said it's the same thing. I said it's a hidden prophecy of the same thing. What is the relation? Let's take a look. So I'm jumping over to Leviticus. Now Leviticus is essentially Moses recounting the law. You do this, these lovely things will happen to you. You do this, these bad things will happen to you. You continue doing this, we're going to multiply those bad things. So Leviticus 25, chapter 25, and reading from verse 15. If you spurn my statutes, and if your soul abhors my rules, so that you will not do all my commandments, but break my covenant, then I will do this to you. I will visit you with panic, with wasting disease and fever that consume your eyes and make the heart ache. And you will sow your seed in vain, because your enemies will eat it. In other words, you will plant, but you'll be invaded. And when you're invaded, your enemies will take it. In the old times when there's war and one country or one nation invades the other, they take all the things that are valuable. And one of the most valuable things is food. So you will sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. I will set my face against you, and you shall be struck down before your enemies. All right? You are faithful to me and obedient. You will have enemies. You will have enemies, but they will not prevail against you. But you are disobedient, and I will cause all your enemies to prevail against you. Those who hate you shall rule over you. Let's get this again. Those who hate you shall rule over you. That's important. And you shall flee when none pursues you. And if in spite of this you will not listen to me, then I will discipline you again sevenfold for your sins. Take note of that those who hate you shall rule over you. Alright, so I'm going to judge you. But if you continue after the judgment doing wickedness, I'm going to multiply it 7 times. Alright? Israel was an independent nation. They split and there were 2 independent nations. And then, first Assyria came up against the north, and Babylon came up against the south. And they were no longer independent. They were ruled over by people who hated them. Assyria was a nation that was psychotic to the core. That's probably why they don't exist anymore. All right? In fact, the whole book of Job is because Yahweh told Jonah, the whole book of Jonah. Yahweh told Jonah to go and warn Assyria. And Jonah said, no, I'm not doing it, because Assyria is so wicked. I want you to judge them. I want you to wipe them out. Right? Because if I go and talk to them, they may listen and they may stop, but they're wicked. They need to be punished. Assyria were a nation of sociopaths. That's why there is no Assyria today, and there haven't been an Assyria for a long time. But Yahweh is saying, your enemies will rule over you. Alright? And you're always going to be running, always going to be fleeing. Sometimes nobody pursuing you, but even a thought in your head that there's a potential threat, you're going to pick up and start to run. Alright? It sounds very much like the whole wandering Jew thing, that for years the Jews will just pick up and move. They wandered all over Europe. Alright? But if after all that punishment you don't change and you continue to not be obedient, then I will take this punishment and I will multiply it. Alright? I will multiply. So, let's continue. I'll multiply it 7 times, sorry. Let's continue. So, we're down to the part where we have to do some math. Alright? So, 390 years is the punishment Yahweh decreed because of the disobedience of the kingdom of Israel. Alright? 390 years. 40 years is the punishment Yahweh decreed because of the kingdom of Judah. That comes up to a total of 430 years. Okay? The Babylonian captivity lasted 70 years. So 430 years minus 70 years equals 360 years. So coming out of the Babylonian captivity, Israel had 360 years of punishment, where their enemies will rule over them, etc., etc., etc. All right? Now, Israel, after the Maccabean revolt, did have a brief period of they ruling themselves, but they had 360 years of punishment in total left. All right? But based on the covenant that we saw in Leviticus, continued disobedience brings a sevenfold punishment added to what they already have. And did Israel continue to disobey? Yeah. After they returned from Babylon, they didn't serve idols anymore, really. But they got weird. They splintered into groups. So within a few hundred years of the return from Babylon, there were three sects of Jews. There were Sadducees, and the Sadducees only believed in the 5 books of the Torah. They didn't believe in resurrection, etc. So they were very worldly. Because if you don't believe that there's a resurrection, there's an afterlife, anything like that, you figure, okay, the best that there is now. So let me enjoy what's here now. So the Sadducees were the group most likely to align themselves with foreign nations and behave like the foreign nations. And that's what they did. Then there was the Pharisees. They went on the other side and they made up stuff, like they made up the oral Torah. All right, they codified it some years later, but they made it up. They made up a whole host of rules that's not even in the Pentateuch, in the 5 books of Moses. They made up a whole host of rules, and they focus more on the rules than the relationship. Rules are a guardrail. Rules are a guardrail. All right? A guardrail for children. You make rules for your children. So because they're young, they're dumb. They don't know what they're doing. So you put up these guard rules so that the children will not damage themselves. But those guardrails are out of love. But instead of seeing it as guardrails and having a relationship, they essentially the rules became almost like Yahweh. So they didn't focus on what Yahweh wants. They just focused on, these rules. And you see, that's what religion does. I tell people I'm not religious, and people don't understand. It's not about the rules. It's about the relationship. All right? It's about the relationship. So the Pharisees focused on all these rules, and Pharisaic Judaism became rabbinical Judaism. And that's what they have today. So that's why if you're a Jew, you have all these rules. They wouldn't even turn on a light switch because that is considered they wouldn't turn on a light switch on the Sabbath because that is that's considered work. So they have a Gentile who comes around to turn on the light switch. Because we need the light, but if we turn on the light switch, that would consider it work. Yahweh's purpose is not to make your life harder. Yahweh's purpose is to put things down. One, so that you'll protect yourselves. You don't go over the guardrails and end up falling into a ditch. And number 2, to understand them. But instead of trying to understand Yahweh, we focus on the rules. And that's what religion does. Yahweh doesn't want religion. He wants relationship. And the I was talking about the 3 sects. The 3rd sex were the Essenes. So after Christ died, Sadducees, who were the temple elite, they disappeared because there's no temple. If there's no temple, the Sadducees will go away. All right? The Pharisaic Jews became the rabbinical Jews, and they are the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox today. And essentially all the Essenes became Christians. All right? And what did they do to bring forth the 7-fold punishment? They didn't recognize the hour of their visitation. They didn't realize that the Messiah came. and they rejected as a nation. Not everyone rejected them. All the Essenes became Christians, and without violence, within a very short space of time, they conquered the world. They conquered the world with the word. All right? The Roman Empire put Christ to death around 32 AD, and 300 years later, the Roman Empire converted to Christianity. Not with violence. They conquered the entire Middle Eastern region, not with violence. The group that conquered with violence came thereafter. They weren't Christians, but they didn't conquer with violence. They conquered with the word. All right? So, the rejection of Jesus brought a sevenfold judgment. So 360 years, right? They had 360 years of punishment left. 360 years multiplied by 7 equals 2,520 years. Mini, tekel, and parson. That's how the two of them are related. Now, let's take all of this and pull it together for us today. All right? So let's go. So, in 536 BC, Zerubbabel and the first group of exile returned to Israel from Babylon. Now, I said that there are 2,520 years of punishment, the sevenfold punishment, the 360 multiplied by 7. The problem is, a year then is not equal to a year now. Their years in the days of the Old Testament and the New Testament were 360 days. Our years currently, because we use a Julian calendar, our years consist of 365 and a quarter days. Why a quarter? Well, every 4 years we have a leap year. All right? So our year is actually 365 and a quarter days. And we push that quarter day every year out, and then every 4 years have a leap year. So we have to turn that 2,520 days from ancient biblical years to our modern years. How do we do that? Well, simple. We multiply 2,520 days by 360 days. We bring it down to the lowest common denominator. And the lowest common denominator is days. A day then is a day now. Alright? So when we multiply 2,520 years by 360 days, we come up to 907,200 days. And a day then is a day now. Now, some people will take this figure, 907,200 days, and they will work on this figure along with the exact timing of when the exiles returned to Israel. All right? Some people go dig in and look to find the exact time of year that Israel returned or started returning from Babylonian captivity. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep it simple. All right? But I've seen where some people do this, and it kind of comes out down to a particular day. But we're going to keep it simple. All right? So we're going to multiply 2,520 days to 360. We brought it to 907,200 days. And then we're going to turn this into our years. So, how do we turn that into our years? Well, we divide 907,200 days by what our years are, which are 365 from 0.25 years. And that comes up to 2,483 years, 0.77. We'll disregard the 0.77 for now because we're not trying to bring it to a day. We're going to try to bring this just to a year. All right? So how do we bring this to a year? What we do now is we take this 2,483 modern years and we minus 536 years, which is the year that Zerubbabel and the first exile returned. And we get 1947. Now there's an error here. Why there's an error here? We're going from BC to AD, but there is no 0 BC or 0 AD. It goes from 1 BC to 1 AD. So to this you have to add 1. And when you add 1 to 1947, all right? So you add 1 as there's no 0 BC. And when you add 1 to 1947, you get 1948. What happened in 1948? Israel became a nation. So for the first time in thousands of years, Israel became a nation that ruled itself. It ruled itself. I mean, granted, it was attacked by all its neighbors the next day and surprisingly won, but not surprisingly, God's with them. So they won, so Israel became a nation in 1948. I believe May 14th, somewhere around there. 1948. Let's continue. Let's look at something else. Now, although the first exiles came back from Babylon or started coming back in 536, they built their houses. In fact, if you look at Ezra and some of the minor prophets, there are minor prophets who are railing, you're building your houses, but there's no house of the Lord. There's no temple. We were put in exile because we didn't do what Yahweh wanted. And you've come back to the land. Yahweh's brought us back to the land after 7 years, just like he promised. But we focus on ourselves. We're building houses for ourselves. But we're not studying Yahweh. To focus on Yahweh, you have to have a temple. Why are we not building a temple? So, in 517, the second temple was built. It wasn't dedicated and put into service till probably a year or so later, but it was built by 517. So if we take 517, we take the 2520 years, the sevenfold punishment, and we do all this to convert it to our modern years. So we multiply the 2520 by 360, come up with the amount of days, and we convert those amount of days into modern years, 2,483 years, and we minus 517 from the 2,483 years, we get 1966. But then remember, we need to add 1 as there's no 0 BC or 0 AD. Okay? So when we add 1, we get 1967. What happened in 1967? The nations all around them were going to attack, and Israel preempted and, launched a preemptive attack. And in 6 days, a nation over 100 times smaller than their neighbors beat all of them in 6 days. And they regained control of Jerusalem in 1967. Some people have gone and found the day that the temple was completed and counted the days, all 907,200 days, and I've actually come up with June 7th. We're not going to do that. We're keeping it simple because simple is enough. Now, why is this important? We live in the era of lies. And right now, there are a whole bunch of people walking around lying. Those people in Israel are not the real Jews. The real Jews are this, the real Jews are that. In fact, I have a very dear friend. And that friend was distraught because there's this... I'm looking for the correct word. and I'll leave it nice. There's this very misguided woman who is on the internet calling herself Prophet Celeste or Prophetess Celeste, or I think something like that. And she was stating that, the modern Israel is not the real Israel and God's going to punish all who support them. Well, I'll say this to all those who think that Israel is not the real Israel and they're not real Jews. If they're not real Jews, how come God is fulfilling prophecy using them? Since Israel has been in the land, hundreds of prophecies have been fulfilled. But the biggest one, if you want to think about this as coincidence, it's up to you. I don't see coincidence in it because I don't really believe in coincidence. All right? 1948, they become a nation. 1967, they get Jerusalem. Because the heart of Jerusalem is a temple. So 2,520 years from them rebuilding Jerusalem and putting a heart in Jerusalem, they regain control of Jerusalem. So if the real Israel is not those who are in the land, then Yahweh is very, very, very confused because he's using the people who are not the real Israel to fulfill prophecy. We live in the time of deception. This is, and this has been, the hidden prophecy. It's not only in Daniel, it's all over the Bible. I just decided to use 2 of the places. So, hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps. All right? And I hope it helps to deal with some of the deception and the lies that are out there. All right? I'm not sure what's the next video that I'll be doing. Maybe I'll do the Olivet Discourse. I've been toying with the idea of potentially doing or starting Revelation. I don't know. I'll see as God guides. But I hope you've enjoyed it. All right? And I just thank you. I'd like to thank you. And God bless. Have a great day.